When I stepped into apartment 312 that morning, I thought it was just another call. I was wrong. What I found that day would haunt me for the rest of my life. The rain was relentless that October morning in Florence, South Carolina. It hammered against the windshield of my unmarked sedan like it was trying to wash away something terrible before I could see it. The sirens had already gone quiet by the time I arrived. That's when you know it's bad. When there's no rush anymore. When there's nothing left to save. I've been a detective for 12 years, and I've seen things that would make most people lose sleep for months. But something about that morning felt different. The air was thick, heavy with more than just humidity. It carried weight. The kind that presses down on your chest and whispers that whatever you're about to see will change everything. The hallway of the apartment complex was narrow, dimly lit, with water stains running down the walls like tears. Officers stood outside the door, their faces pale, refusing to make eye contact. That's never a good sign. One of them, a rookie barely out of the academy, was leaning against the wall trying not to be sick. I pushed open the door to apartment 312, and the smell hit me first. Mold, iron, and something else. Something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. The living room was modest, cluttered with the kind of things young people collect when they're trying to make a place feel like home. Thrift store furniture, string lights that weren't plugged in, a half-empty coffee cup on the table. And then I saw her, Enzinga Odum, 24 years old, dancer, dreamer, gone. Her body lay crumpled near the bedroom doorway, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something or someone. There were signs of a struggle, overturned chair, broken glass, and on her wrist, barely visible beneath the dried blood, was a gold bracelet. I knelt down and read the engraving. "Forever yours, P." That bracelet would become the key to everything, but at that moment, all I could think about was how young she looked, how her whole life had been ahead of her, and how someone had stolen it in the most brutal way possible. Stay with me, because the truth about what happened in that apartment is stranger and darker than anyone could have imagined. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. A young woman, Enzinga Odum, 24 years old. A dancer with dreams bigger than the small southern town she called home. A detective with 12 years on the force, facing the case that would define his career and test every principle he'd built his life on, and a gold bracelet engraved with the words, "Forever yours, P." 3 letters that would unravel an entire web of lies, corruption, and secrets buried so deep that some people were willing to kill to keep them hidden. Who was P? Why did Enzinga have to die? And what secret was buried in apartment 312 that was so dangerous it cost a young woman her life? These are the questions that kept me awake for months. Questions that led me down paths I never expected to travel. Questions that revealed truths about my city, about power, and about how easily justice can be bought and sold. The bracelet wasn't just jewelry, it was a thread, and when I pulled it, everything started to unravel. By the time I understood what I was really dealing with, it was almost too late. Almost. This is the story of Enzinga Odum, but it's also the story of every person who's ever been silenced, every truth that's been buried, every time someone with power thought they could get away with murder. They were wrong. To understand how Enzinga Odum ended up in that apartment, you have to understand who she was. Not the victim in the crime scene photos, not the headline in the newspaper, the real person, the woman with hopes and fears and dreams that should have come true. Enzinga grew up in a small town about 40 miles outside Florence. Her childhood wasn't easy. Single mother working 2 jobs, an older brother who got mixed up with the wrong crowd and ended up serving time. But Enzinga was different. She was determined. She wanted more than what her circumstances offered. She wanted to dance, not just as a hobby, but professionally. She spent hours watching videos online, teaching herself moves, practicing in her bedroom until her mother would knock on the wall and tell her to keep it down. By the time she graduated high school, she was good. Really good. Good enough that she moved to Florence to pursue her dream, waiting tables during the day and dancing at a club called the Purple Room at night. It wasn't Broadway. It wasn't even close, but it was a start. Her friends described her as magnetic, the kind of person who lit up a room just by walking into it. She had this laugh that was infectious, this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she talked to you. But beneath that bright exterior, there was something else. A restlessness, a feeling that she was running out of time. Several of her friends mentioned that in the months before she died, Enzinga had talked about leaving, starting over somewhere new. Los Angeles, maybe, or Atlanta. Somewhere with real opportunities, somewhere she could finally become the person she knew she was meant to be. But leaving required money. More money than she had. And that's where things get complicated. That's where P enters the story. Enzinga had been seeing someone. Her friends knew about him, but only in fragments. She never posted pictures with him on social media. Never brought him around. When they asked about him, she'd smile and say he was complicated. That he was helping her save up for her big move. That he cared about her. That he promised he'd take care of her. They called him P. Just the initial. Nothing more. Some of her friends thought he was married. Others thought he was just private. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody had ever met him. And when I started investigating, I realized that was by design. Now let me tell you about myself, because understanding this case requires understanding the person who investigated it. My name is Ezra Ono. I've been a detective with the Florence Police Department for 12 years. I grew up here, went to college here, came back here. This city is in my blood. I became a cop because I believed in justice. I believed that the system, for all its flaws, could work if people were willing to fight for it. I believed that truth mattered. But 12 years on the force teaches you things. It teaches you that justice isn't always blind, that money talks louder than evidence, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. I'd worked homicides before, domestic disputes that turned deadly, gang violence, drug deals gone wrong. But I'd never worked a case like this, never dealt with someone who had the kind of power that P had, the kind of power that makes evidence disappear, that makes witnesses suddenly forget what they saw, that makes your own department turn against you. I should have known what I was getting into the moment I saw that bracelet, but by then it was too late to turn back. Let me walk you through what happened the night Enzinga died, or at least what we were able to piece together. The last time anyone saw Enzinga alive was at the Purple Room around 11:30 on a Wednesday night. She'd finished her shift, changed out of her work clothes, and walked out the back entrance to the parking lot. We pulled the security footage from the club. The camera was old, the quality grainy, but you could make out enough. Enzinga walked to her car, a beat-up Honda Civic that barely ran. She stood there for a moment, checking her phone. Then a vehicle pulled up beside her, a dark sedan, expensive, the kind of car that doesn't belong in that neighborhood. She looked up, smiled, and got in. The car drove away. That was at 11:42 p.m. By 7:30 the next morning, she was dead. The first call came in at 7:15. A neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment below Enzinga's, called 911. She told the dispatcher she'd heard a scream around 5 a.m. A loud, terrible scream that woke her from sleep. But then nothing. Just silence. She'd almost convinced herself it was part of a dream, or maybe the thunder from the storm that had rolled in overnight. But something bothered her, a feeling in her gut. So she went upstairs and knocked on Enzinga's door. No answer. She knocked again. Nothing. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack, enough that Mrs. Patterson could see into the apartment. That's when she saw the overturned furniture, the broken glass, and a hand, pale and still, visible on the floor. She ran back to her apartment and called 911. The first officers arrived at 7:28. They secured the scene, called for backup, called for detectives, called for me. When I arrived, the apartment was already crawling with people. Crime scene techs, photographers, the medical examiner. But they'd left the body untouched, waiting for the lead detective. That was protocol. That was me. I'll never forget walking into that apartment. The smell hit me first, like I said, then the sight of her. Enzinga was lying near the bedroom doorway. She was wearing a nightgown, torn at the shoulder. Her face was turned to the side, eyes still open, staring at nothing. There were bruises on her arms, her neck, defensive wounds on her hands. She'd fought. God, she'd fought hard. But whoever did this was stronger. Or maybe she'd been drugged. We'd find that out later. The apartment told a story. A violent, terrible story. The living room coffee table was overturned. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. In the kitchen, a chair was knocked over. There were scratch marks on the wall near the front door, like she'd tried to claw her way out. But what really caught my attention was the bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled. On the nightstand was a half-empty glass of wine, and on the floor, partially hidden under the bed, was a syringe. We bagged it as evidence immediately. Later, the lab would tell us it contained traces of a sedative, Rohypnol, the date rape drug. Someone had drugged her. Someone had planned this. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated. As I walked through the apartment, cataloging every detail, I noticed something on her wrist. The bracelet, gold, delicate, with an engraving. I knelt down and read it. Forever yours, P. I took photos, made notes. And then I heard it. A buzzing sound. Faint. Coming from under the couch. I walked over and found a cell phone. Enzinga's phone. The screen was cracked, but it was still on. Notifications lit up the screen. Messages from someone saved in her contacts as just P. The most recent message had come in at 4:53 a.m., just minutes before the neighbor heard the scream. It read, "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." I stared at that message for a long time. What did it mean? Was P confessing, apologizing, or was this something else entirely? I bagged the phone as evidence. We'd need to get into it. Pull. The first 48 hours after a homicide are critical. Evidence is fresh. Memories are clear. Witnesses haven't had time to be influenced or scared off. I knew I had to move fast, but this case was different from the start. This case had resistance built into it. We started with the basics, interviewing everyone who knew Enzinga. Her co-workers at the diner where she waited tables described her as sweet, hardworking, always smiling. But one of them, a woman named Cassie, mentioned something interesting. She said that about 6 months before she died, Enzinga had started coming to work with expensive things: a new purse, designer shoes, a gold bracelet. When Cassie asked where she got the money, Enzinga just smiled and said she'd met someone who was helping her out. Cassie assumed it was a boyfriend, a rich boyfriend, maybe someone older. But Enzinga never gave details. At the Purple Room, the story was similar. The manager, a man named Terrence, told me Enzinga had been one of his best dancers, reliable, professional. But in recent months, she'd started taking more nights off. She'd told him she was working on something that would let her quit soon, start fresh somewhere else. When I pressed him about whether she'd mentioned anyone she was seeing, he hesitated. Then he said there was a regular customer, a man who came in every few weeks, always sat in the back, always asked for Enzinga specifically, paid well, tipped even better. Terrence never got his name, paid cash, wore expensive suits, drove a nice car. But here's the thing. About 3 weeks before Enzinga died, the man stopped coming, just disappeared. Enzinga seemed upset about it, distracted, like she was waiting for him to come back. I asked Terrence if he could describe the man. He tried, middle-aged, white, well-groomed, could have been anyone, but it was a start. We also interviewed Enzinga's neighbors. Most of them barely knew her. She kept to herself, came and went at odd hours because of her work schedule. But Mrs. Patterson, the woman who found her, had more to say. She told me that in the weeks before Enzinga died, She'd heard arguments coming from the apartment. Raised voices. Enzinga and a man. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was clear they were fighting. Mrs. Patterson also mentioned seeing a dark sedan parked outside the building several times late at night. She assumed it belonged to a boyfriend. I asked if she'd gotten a license plate. She hadn't, but she remembered the car was expensive, maybe a Mercedes or a BMW, something out of place in that neighborhood. Meanwhile, the forensic team was processing the apartment. They lifted fingerprints from every surface, found DNA on the wine glass, on the sheets, on Enzinga's body. They also found something else, traces of semen, evidence of sexual activity shortly before her death. We sent everything to the lab for analysis. It would take time, but DNA doesn't lie. If we could match it to someone in the system, we'd have our killer. The phone was our biggest break. It took our tech team 2 days to crack it, but when they did, it was like opening a vault. Hundreds of messages between Enzinga and P. They went back almost a year. At first, the messages were flirty, casual. P complimented her dancing, told her she was special, different. He started offering to help her, paying for things. Small stuff at first, then bigger things. Rent, car repairs, new clothes. In return, Enzinga spent time with him. The messages made it clear they were sleeping together. But it was more than that. P made promises. He told her he'd help her get out of Florence, help her start over. He said he cared about her, that she was more than just a fling. But as the months went on, the tone of the messages changed. P started getting possessive, jealous. He'd ask where she was, who she was with, why she wasn't answering his calls. Enzinga pushed back, told him she wasn't his property, that she needed space. The last few weeks of messages were tense. P was desperate, begging her not to leave, saying he couldn't lose her. And then, the final message, sent at 4:53 a.m. on the morning she died. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. But here's the thing. The phone records showed something else. There were calls from P's number that morning, multiple calls, starting at 5:10 a.m., after Enzinga was already dead. Someone was calling her phone, trying to reach her, or maybe trying to cover their tracks. We traced the number. It was a burner phone, no name attached, no way to trace it to a person directly, but the cell tower data showed where the calls were coming from. And that's when things got complicated. The calls were coming from an area near the state capitol building, downtown Florence, the kind of area where politicians work, where powerful people live. I had a sinking feeling in my gut. P wasn't just some rich guy. He was someone important, someone connected, and that meant this investigation was about to get a lot more dangerous. It took us 3 weeks to crack the identity of P. 3 weeks of dead ends, stonewalling, and pressure from above to drop the case. But I don't drop cases. Not when a young woman's life has been stolen. Not when someone thinks they can get away with murder just because they have money and power. The break came from an unlikely source. A photo. Buried deep in Enzinga's phone, in a folder she'd hidden behind a password, was a single picture. It was taken from inside a car. Through the windshield you could see the back of a building, a parking garage, and in the frame, partially visible, was a license plate. It was blurry, but our tech team enhanced it, ran it through the DMV database, and when the results came back, my blood ran cold. The car was registered to a man named Preston Caldwell. If you're not from South Carolina, that name might not mean anything to you, but around here, it means everything. Preston Caldwell was a state senator, 46 years old, married, 3 kids, a rising star in the political world. He'd been in office for 8 years, and word was he had his eyes on a congressional seat. Maybe even governor someday. He was charming, well-spoken, the kind of politician who showed up at every community event, shook every hand, kissed every baby. He donated to charities, sponsored youth programs. He was untouchable, or so he thought. When I brought the information to my captain, I expected support. I expected him to say, "Good work, Ono. Let's bring him in." Instead, I got silence. Then I got warned. My captain, a man I'd worked under for 8 years, told me to be careful, told me that accusing someone like Preston Caldwell without ironclad evidence would destroy my career, that powerful people have powerful friends, that I needed to be absolutely sure before I made a move. I told him I was sure. The bracelet, the messages, the license plate. It all pointed to Caldwell. He told me to get more. So I did. I started digging into Caldwell's life, his finances, his schedule, his associates, and the more I dug, the more I found. Caldwell had a reputation that was carefully managed and meticulously hidden. But people talk, especially when you push the right buttons. I spoke to former staffers, people who'd worked on his campaigns, people who'd been around him behind closed doors. They told me stories about how Caldwell liked young women, how he'd use his power and influence to get close to them, how he'd make promises, offer help. And then, when they tried to leave or say no, he'd turn nasty. One woman, a former intern, told me Caldwell had propositioned her. When she refused, she was suddenly let go. No reason given, no severance, just gone. She was too afraid to come forward, afraid of what it would do to her career, afraid no one would believe her. I believed her, and I believed Enzinga. We also found financial records. Caldwell had been making cash withdrawals, large amounts, thousands of dollars at a time, always in cash, no paper trail. It lined up perfectly with the timeline of his relationship with Enzinga. He was paying her, keeping her quiet, keeping her close. But then something changed. Maybe Enzinga wanted more. Maybe she threatened to go public. Maybe she just wanted out. Whatever it was, Caldwell couldn't let her leave. Not when she knew too much. Not when she had the power to destroy him. So he killed her. Or at least, that's what I thought. But when we finally got the DNA results back from the lab, something didn't add up. The DNA from the crime scene, the semen, the fingerprints, they matched someone in the system. But it wasn't Preston Caldwell. It was his son. Tyler Caldwell, 23 years old, college dropout, trust fund kid with a history of problems, DUIs, bar fights, assault charges that mysteriously disappeared. I should have seen it coming, but I was so focused on the senator that I missed what was right in front of me. When the DNA came back as a match for Tyler, everything shifted. We pulled his records, looked into his background, and what we found was disturbing. Tyler had a pattern of violence toward women. There were multiple complaints filed against him over the years. A girl in high school accused him of assault, dropped the charges after the Caldwell family's lawyers got involved. A woman in college filed a restraining order. It expired after Tyler's father made a generous donation to the university. The pattern was clear. Tyler was dangerous, and his father had been covering for him for years. We brought Tyler in for questioning. He showed up with 3 lawyers, refused to answer most of our questions. But we didn't need him to talk. The evidence spoke for itself. His DNA was all over that apartment, on the wine glass, on the sheets, on Enzinga's body. The syringe we found had his fingerprints on it. But here's where it gets complicated. Tyler didn't act alone. The phone records, the messages from P. Those were from Preston Caldwell. The senator had been the one texting Enzinga, the one making promises, the one paying her. But on the night she died, it was Tyler who showed up at her apartment. Why? Because Enzinga had threatened to go public. She'd told Preston she was done, that she was going to expose their relationship, tell the media, ruin him. Preston panicked. He couldn't let that happen, but he couldn't do it himself. So he sent his son, told him to talk to her, convince her to stay quiet, offered Tyler money to handle it. But Tyler didn't just talk. Tyler had been drinking, using cocaine. He was high and angry, and when Enzinga refused to back down, he snapped. He drugged her drink, waited for the sedative to kick in, and then he assaulted her. When she started to come to, started to fight back, he panicked. He didn't mean to kill her. At least that's what his lawyers would later claim. But intent doesn't matter when someone ends up dead. After it was over, Tyler called his father, told him what happened, and Preston, Caldwell state senator, family man, pillar of the community, made a choice. He chose to protect his son. He helped Tyler clean up the scene, told him to leave, sent those text messages from his own phone to make it look like he was the one there, to confuse the investigation, to buy time. By the time we pieced it all together, Tyler was gone. His father had sent him out of the country, private jet, fake passport, money in offshore accounts. He was in Brazil within 24 hours of Enzinga's death, and Brazil doesn't extradite for murder. We arrested Preston Caldwell, charged him as an accessory after the fact. Obstruction of justice, witness tampering. The media went crazy. The trial was a circus. Caldwell's lawyers argued he was just a father trying to protect his son, that he'd made a mistake in the heat of the moment, that he didn't kill anyone. The jury didn't buy it. He was convicted, sentenced to 15 years. But Tyler? Tyler never faced justice. He's still out there, living in Rio de Janeiro, living off his family's money, living free while Enzinga Odum is dead. That's the part that haunts me. Not that we solved the case, not that we brought down a corrupt politician, but that the person who actually killed her, the person who took her life, got away. Because he had money, because he had privilege, because the system that's supposed to deliver justice failed. Enzinga's family filed a civil suit against the Caldwell family. They won. A multi-million-dollar settlement. But no amount of money brings her back. No amount of money gives her the life she should have had, the dreams she should have fulfilled. Her mother told me something I'll never forget. She said, "My daughter died because she wanted more, because she dared to dream bigger than her circumstances, and a powerful man saw that as a threat." How many other girls are out there right now in the same situation, with no one to protect them? I didn't have an answer for her. I still don't. It's been 2 years since I closed the Enzinga Odum case. 2 years since I walked out of that apartment for the last time. The building has new tenants now. Life moved on. But I haven't. Some cases stay with you. They burrow into your mind and make a home there. They remind you why you became a cop in the first place, and why sometimes being a cop isn't enough. Enzinga Odum was 24 years old when she died. She was a dancer, a dreamer, a daughter, a friend. She was someone who deserved better than what this world gave her. She deserved justice, real justice. Not the half measure we got. Not the compromise. I think about her a lot. I think about the bracelet. "Forever yours, P." What a cruel joke. Forever turned out to be less than a year, and P turned out to be a monster. I also think about all the other Enzingas out there, the young women who are vulnerable, who are manipulated by powerful men, who are silenced when they try to speak up. How many of them are we not hearing? How many cases are we not solving? The system is broken. I know that now. I've seen it from the inside. I've watched evidence disappear. Witnesses recant. Powerful people walk free while the powerless pay the price. But I also know there are people fighting, people who refuse to give up, people who believe that truth still matters. I want to be one of those people. I have to be. Because if I'm not, then what was the point of any of this? So I'm asking you, what do you think? Do you think Tyler Caldwell should be brought back to face trial? Do you think his father got what he deserved? Or do you think the system failed Enzinga? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And if you were in my position, if you were the detective on this case, what would you have done differently? How would you have felt walking into that apartment, knowing what you were about to find? These are questions I ask myself every day. Before I go, I want you to think about something. We live in a world where power often trumps justice, where money can buy freedom, where the truth can be buried if you have the right connections. But we also live in a world where people like you are paying attention, asking questions, demanding answers. That matters. You matter. Your voice matters. So use it. If this story shook you, If it made you angry or sad or determined to see change, then wait until you hear what happened in the widow's tape. Another case where the truth was hidden in plain sight. Another story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. What's your take on this? Comment below. I'm reading every single one. And if this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life mysteries you'll never forget. Because the truth is out there. We just have to be brave enough to find it.